Welcome all. In this video I'm going to show you how to draw an everyday object. I found this interesting looking object in a toolbox and I'd like to draw it across this double page here in my sketchbook. So when you start off you need to place the object directly in front of the sketchbook in the direction that you're drawing it in so that I can see it properly. And I want this composition to go all the way from one side of a page to the other. So I'm going to slightly enlarge the drawing of the object. I'm going to position it in a place where it will look visually pleasing on the page. If you imagine the object on there but slightly bigger, that will be really nice because the clippers will spend their moment in this corner here and those arms will stretch right to the other side of the page, using as much space across the page as possible. And the next thing to do is to use a 2B pencil. This will be the hardest pencil that we use, and it is to make some very light marks so that you can map out the whole shape across the piece. I'm even going to hold my pencil like this so I create a light mark across it. You position your body in a place where it's going to be still, and I start by softly drawing out the shape. Now I've got a horizontal line which I'm going to put about a third of the way across the page, and it is going to go right to the other side there. These marks will just help guide. There's a diagonal line coming up in this direction. I'm going to draw that too. When you do this drawing, there's a balance to be made. There is the proportion of the clippers, the object that you're drawing, and there is the space that you have on the page. So your drawing is going to be a balance of what you can fit on the page and proportionally what will look right. So I'm getting these parts in. Very light to begin with because in time you'll be able to make these more accurate. Do not worry if you go off the page with your design. Sometimes it's nice to think outside the box, or rectangle in this case. Once you've filled the composition, the next step is for you to find a moment inside the object, like a flower blossoming from the center. I'm going to start to go into more accurate details in the middle. I will take this object here, a bolt. Now that becomes a small universe in itself because around it the whole galaxy will go. I'm focusing right in on that little bolt to begin with. Because we've got the shape, we know roughly where everything is. Roughly, the same measurement of the bolt across there will be similar to the measurement across to the side to this point here. And from that I can measure out how big that gap is between the bolt and the edge of that top of the clippers. I can throw a diagonal line along here. Now notice that I want this diagonal line to be similar to the one on this page. This is why it is important to know what your horizontals and verticals are doing. So I've got my diagonal along here, and then it changes direction. When it gets to about horizontal with this, it changes direction and it sort of curves upwards a little bit. And you want to get that accurate, so it's veering a little bit more to the right than the vertical. So if I had a vertical line there, it goes a little bit more to the right. And from there I'm noticing it changes again, it changes direction and it goes veering off to the left of the horizontal. If you've got the horizontal line there, it goes a little bit left. And again, it changes direction once it does it, this. So this line here as well that veers off to the left is roughly parallel to this space here. So I'm going to make that clear here. So that is, those lines are parallel. Then next is a line that comes in this direction, and it veers more in the direction towards the horizontal. So more right and more to the horizontal. And then I have a line that comes down here, and it is roughly at that diagonal there, angle-wise. Now, at this point, it comes downwards, that line, and it comes just veering off to the right of the downward direction. And that will then lead us to just under the 3/4 of the way along there. There will be a change, and it will diagonally, the shears will follow diagonally down in that direction. Now this line here is going to follow it almost parallel, and I will follow the blade all the way down to roughly where I think the end of the shears are, so I'll pull it down here. You might see that the underdrawing is changed by these maybe more accurate lines that occur. I'm going to put the end on it there at the moment. I'm not sure about those lines yet, so I will find them out later once I get a few more of these marks, starting from this little universe in the middle, starting from the nut. So directly above the nut, where a line intersects this middle part here, I'm going to pull out another line, and that is going to go in this direction. So just above the horizontal, an angle of slight incline, and it's going to go around there, and it's going to curve a little bit towards a horizontal. Now I've got a couple of these lines here, so now I'm going to go and start from the universe in the middle again, and I'm going to look at the vertical going down from here, and I'm going to go a little bit further and try and get that second layer, the sort of dark underside here. And that's going to twist around there, and it's going to taper off a little bit, so it gets thinner and thinner as it goes in that direction. Now with that sideline there, I know that just underneath that side there is where this line at the bottom intersects this shape here. These lines are roughly parallel to the ones above it, so I'll pull those together. I've also got this line here. If I go to the horizontally across, that will give me where this line ends and where it changes and goes more into the tapering line. And you'll see this tapering line actually intersects in the same place that this line does as well, so I'll put that there. We can bring this line further down. The angle of this slightly curves around, but only slightly, just around here. Follow it round. I'm happy for it to go right to here. I'm going to shade this in slightly just so I can see that that's the edge of the piece. I can go into more detail in that later. Now next, you want to take that horizontal and find that intersection there, and then this is actually where that horizontal line starts from, and it's roughly horizontal. I'm going to draw it a little bit so it's going down a little bit, and I'll pull it right to the end for now, just so it's been put in as a structure. I'm going to find an intersection here. It's roughly 2/3 along here is where the top of it is, and then an extra third is where the bottom of it is. So it's roughly this side and that side, and I'm going to pull this, and this one actually is more horizontal, so I'm going to bring that out right to the end there. And this one underneath is again relatively horizontal, but it tapers towards the line above it just there, so I'll pull that in there too. So we've got that side, that's great. There's a point where this line intersects just there, and I'm going to bring a line out here. It is going to go horizontally upwards. I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to pull it along the lines where they've been before. In between this line here, halfway, is a line where the side, which I'm going to shade in here, is just roughly at the middle of the page. I can see that, well, two of those bolts, 1, 2, along there, 1, 2, two of those bolts is where this middle diagonal starts. And it curves round a little. This curve at the top here is roughly the size of that bolt. So I'll go back to my universe, my bolt, and I will place my pencil there so I can measure how big this is. And I'm going to curve it round, and it's going to go at this angle, and it's going to go to the other side. I can actually pull it down to this side, because I can see that angle is just right for this, and I'm going to pull it there, and then I'm going to lift it along here as well. I'm going to do the same with the other side. Again, looking at those parallel lines and seeing how thin that line is. Look at it in relationship to the bolt and other things. So half of the bolt is roughly the size of the thinness of this line. So I'm going to look at half that bolt, yes, it is this thin. I'll pull it down so it reaches that other side there. I'm going to have another parallel line that again goes towards the line that's already been drawn, and it comes all the way to this side here until it reaches around here where it changes direction and comes up. Now you'll see that it's about 1/3 on the top and 2/3 underneath, so I'm going to keep this parallel line as 1/3 on top and 2/3 underneath, and I will bring this on its way down. Now you'll notice that it gets larger as it goes to this edge here, and we're going to follow that down so I can see that that's the point that I need to get to, A, and then this line, it needs to reach B around there, so we'll fill in that shape there. And that is roughly how to be proportionally accurate using your eyes to see how you can calculate where everything is. Roughly horizontal. The bottom of that shear should come up here. Well, that's where there's a tiny little node there, so I'm going to tick that in there. And then on top of that node, there's another bolt size part that sticks out there. So I'll take this bolt, I'll look at it, I'll hold my finger to one side and the edge of the pencil to the other. I'll put my finger on the little node that I've made, and I'll put a little mark there, and that's where the end of the shears are. So I'll curve that round now, and this should help you to curve around the edge of these shears and complete that side of the shears. You can embolden these lines if you wish, once you know that they're accurate and they're the lines that are correct and proportional. And from there we're going to add some tone. I would like you to start in the universe, the middle of the page, in a part where you're confident that the drawing is accurate and correct. I know that this little universe here, this little bolt, is the place where I want to start. I'm starting to get a gradient, a sort of dark to light gradient happening. You may have noticed as well that I have changed my pencil too. I want the marks to be softer now and bolder. So this is a 3B. It gives me more depth and darkness in the tones that I make. Now you'll see in these shears that they go from darker to slightly lighter as they come out further. And they have a soft edge, so I'll maintain that soft edge along the shears here, and if there are any sharp lines you want to make them bold and sharp to emphasize that hardness of what you're drawing. There is not much variation in the darkness of these shears, so I will make it a nice even dark tone just along here with a soft edge. At the moment, it's all about getting the dark, mid and light tones. And to vary your strokes, you want to go in different directions. You see at the moment, all of my lines are going in one direction. You want to change that direction so that the lines become softer and the marks don't look directional, nice and soft. On top, there are actually some directional strokes on this, and they go in this direction here. It must be the blade scratching that metal as it goes past. The directional marks in this case are useful. It gets darker, so you want to show that by going in another direction, and then potentially a third direction as well. Let's go this way. I'll smooth out those lines a little bit. Right to the end, I'm going to get this nice and dark. Next, it's this side here. Now there's a light sparkle. I can see the light coming through at this point, so it's really important to try and imitate that. Put these lines on here like this. So there's that part there. Make sure that you can really see that end in comparison to the other handle here. This spring mechanism. One more to do, and that is this dark section here. Make sure there's a distinction between the under part here and the upper part there. So I'm going to put a thin white line between those sections. So there's our tonal work. We need to get a shadow into this piece, and looking at this table, it's a little bit full on and messy and chaotic. And now I'm using a soft 6B. I will delineate where the shadow is roughly, just with the soft edge here, and it's going to go all the way around here. I'm going to softly, on the edge of my pencil, move my soft shadows just there. The light is mostly coming from straight above, so there isn't a lot of shadowing under this arm here. I can get a lot darker in places, and I can start adding the details that I see in the drawing. So I'm going to put those blotches in to give it a little bit of texture. So it'll really change the way it feels. There's another line along the top. This represents the thin edge of this spring. You don't need to be too accurate with these details as long as the texture feels right for the object that you're drawing. Again, getting some of that rust that changes as it goes around. Pay attention to the changes all the way up this instrument. They're very dark towards the end of this piece, emphasize that. And as the lines go up, they get lighter and lighter towards the handle, and then they get dark again at the other side. You might want to use colouring pencils at this point, maybe on some of the blue areas if you feel inclined. I'm just going to keep this as a tonal study. I like to see bold, solid, strong, confident tones. Actually, this metallic bit is a lot darker than I'm making it out to be, so I'm going to make that darker to show that. I'll do the other handle. I can keep a consistency between the two handles whilst also paying attention to the differences. Now this blade, I'm going to start to build up the tones to give it a naturalistic look. Now this side is darker than that side, so I'm going to emphasize the darkness and really lean into the dark tone of the blade and even make some directional marks. I've noticed part of the blade that has a sort of shine on just there, so I'm going to emphasize that. I'm going to do more directional marks in this way, and also have some details of some of the muck or perhaps plant goo and blood that's still present on the blade. You don't need to choose a tool to draw. You can use any object that you find interesting or fascinating in its shape. The reason I chose this was because of those 4 different directions it goes in. These diagonal lines, which will make for a dynamic composition, hopefully. At this point, you can even go into your work with a rubber. You might find that using a rubber, you can make the texture a little more shiny or refined. Rubbers tend not to be used to rub lines out, but to add to a drawing. to give it a smoothness. However, I will use it to remove lines around, because some of those early lines that I made that are now altered will be useful to remove right at the end. I'm not too keen on this line that goes around the edge of this, so I'm going to try and soften that up by adding tone around it. I can go in a slightly different direction to further fade the lines. Now I'm going to add to the shadow and make it change from dark to light in a smooth way. The shadow underneath is actually darker on this side than the blade. It is important to see what has been missed out from the drawing as well. I've left out all of the paint splodges on the table. There is a shadow underneath this middle diagonal line. I'll place it in now. I will return the dark line that goes along the edge of here, so that it picks up more of the 3D nature of it. I'll put directional marks towards the vertical, because that will further emphasize the shape and the form of this piece. On this side, I'm noticing that the curve isn't quite what I would like. I'm going to follow it round to make it a little tighter. I'm going to darken this. Doing directional marks will emphasize the form. One of the last things I would like to do is to rub out all of the superfluous marks. Those are the ones around the edge of the shadows. The soft graphite that's rubbed off, perhaps from the edge of my hand. This will create a contrast between the light of the page and the darkness of the form. At this point, I can remove the object because I'm just working with the form on the page. Let's get rid of those early marks. See, because they are light, it's very simple to remove. Whilst you're rubbing out, you don't want to smudge the drawing with your fingers or your hand. You want to try and keep your fingers off the graphite as much as possible, to make that paper as bright as possible and without any blemishes or marks. This last stage is quite time consuming. It takes longer than you'd expect, but it really makes a huge difference to the final outcome. And that's how to make a tonal drawing of an everyday object. To prevent your tonal drawing from smudging again, you tend to use fixative. The fixative will hold the graphite in place, but you may have to do this a number of times to make sure that no smudging will occur.